Today, we're going to be talking and really focusing on Stable Diffusion XL. If you've heard of Midjourney, if you've seen some of the cool Midjourney stuff, Midjourney is actually an offshoot of Stable Diffusion. They've done a bunch of parameter tweaking in the background to make things always look really impressive, but not always match exactly what you want, which is why the base Stable Diffusion is really cool. In Stable Diffusion, you can use tags as well. Here's what Stable Diffusion looks like if no one's used it before. So by default, we have a really basic interface to mess around with. You have style, you have prompts, you have negative prompt. You can upload images, you can change the settings, and then you can dream. So obviously, some of these kind of make sense. Some of these are a little weirder. You might be wondering, what is a negative prompt? What styles do they have? So a little bit about prompt engineering. You know, how do we get images we want? The better you can fine tune your prompt, the better you can give parameters to the model on what you want and don't want, the better your results are going to be. When creating prompts, this is sort of like a secret trick, but triple backticks on either side just always results better. It's sort of a weird mechanic, but if you ever start prompting, I'd highly recommend it. Just by enclosing them in triple backticks, you'll already be doing a bit better. I'm going to show some cool use cases for it in a second. But negative prompts, you might be wondering, what does that mean? And negative prompts are basically how you let Dreamstudio and Stable Diffusion know what you don't want to include in the image. I know I had a bunch of issues while I was using Midjourney of where I'm thinking, hey, I want to get some cool thing. I vaguely know what I want it to look like, but I kept getting all these weird artifacts that show up in the background, things that didn't look right, and I had no way of handling it. There's nothing you can do about it in Midjourney. But since we have a bit more bare bones control with Stable Diffusion, you have some access to more specific exclusions. Like, I want to generate a landscape, but I want it to look more like periodic. So I'm going to make sure to remove cars. I'm going to make sure to remove any, fancy modern things I might not want in my background. I want like a fancy little background or desktop background. So yeah, negative prompts really just it. You can see here's direct example. Without negative prompts, you can just get some weird effects happening. Negative prompts help you really fine tune what you are imagining. You know, it's really just a matter of fine tuning prompts. So here's some brief examples of prompts, negative prompts, and parameters and what those kind of look like. So here we got, I mean, if you looked at that photo and didn't tell me it was, well, yeah, I thought it was a photo. If you didn't tell me that was AI generated, I would have had no idea. Like or Stable Diffusion is capable of a lot of like crazy, crazy renders. The results from Stable Diffusion actually are really awesome if you're trying to adapt images too. Stable Diffusion, one of its biggest strengths is when you upload images, it's way better at staying relevant to that image. So, for example, here's one where like we have no negative prompts, we have no parameters whatsoever. Just with Toy Story, this is what it generates. It's a little creepy, I think, honestly. It's like a photorealistic Woody. I don't know. That's a disturbing thing to think about. You have an example of like a nice like bracelet, just I think you'll find by experimenting and getting results. So let's say, I'm half Indian. A cool shot of the Taj Mahal sounds good. Let's see what that looks like. So I want like give me a nice, let's go with a photographic look for it. So I'm going to generate, and just by default, I'm going to see what I get because honestly, I'm not sure. So here's a problem. I Why are there two of them? That's weird. That's not how from experience, that's not how the Taj Mahal looks. So I think I might want to avoid duplicates, mirror image. I think blurry background. I don't know if you look at the far left one, that just looks out of place. That looks like that looks like a little model with like a forest in the background. There's some of these where like it doesn't totally track. That's not how it works. So I'm going to generate them square as well so I don't burn through all my credits immediately. But yeah, already you can see that looks a lot nicer, a lot cleaner. There's no weird blurry background. It's a much more reasonable, like, you upscale a little bit. That looks totally legitimate. They've got the reflections working well, and it's not this weird, like, diorama looking. So that's already negative prompts are a good way of I've gotten something. I don't like all that I've gotten. I'm going to help fine tune this a bit and really narrow down exactly what you're imagining. You can get some really impressive results without negative prompts. I'm a huge fan of this like art style of like blueprints and drafting and stuff. And there are more under the hood tools we can mess around with that we're not going to totally cover. But messing with generation steps, prompt strength, and the exact dimensions of your image, you can do some fancy stuff with it. You can get way more periodic stuff too. Here's like an impressionist painting of Japan. It's really good at synthesizing a lot of these images and mimicking a lot of these styles because let's be real, these actual, data sources, everyone's complained about it. I'm sure everyone's heard about the artist's perspective on AI generated art, but there are huge data sets out there. The internet's pretty big. And before there were rules in place, a lot of these have been scraped together. So that's another reason why Midjourney is actually sometimes looked down negatively upon because the data set that they've trained off of, it's like they'll basically go to DeviantArt and Pixiv and all the like places artists post their work, and they've basically scraped every single thing on that website. Whereas some of the other models that are coming out, you might have heard of the Adobe Firefly. Adobe Firefly is really cool. That is the Adobe version of image generation. Theirs is trained only off Adobe stock photos. So it is all of their own intellectual property they own. So there's, the rules are getting weirder and weirder around AI art. They're still being really hammered out as we speak, but it's stuff like what we're doing here with Stable Diffusion has some really potentially awesome results off of not as morally awful reasons. So, what are actual applications of prompt engineering and actual applications of these AI generated images? Here are three that we came up with. These are ones that I've seen actively. So, I know Jaden can talk about the first one, but making indie games. This one happens to be a 1 week program we had here at AI Camp for game development. Jaden, you want to explain a little bit about that?
Well, sure. I mean, we both totally could. Essentially, we ran the 1 week camp, and for making these games, we obviously needed to give titles and aesthetics and themes to all of them. And then one of the biggest areas that we did that was in making a loading screen for these games. And my team actually ended up trying to generate like a Bowser style boss fight for our game. And we were looking up castle art. And we generated one that actually had this weird artifact anomaly. For whatever reason, with the way that we were prompting it with like game title art, it gave us a game title. And we kind of liked it. So we ended up naming our game Hazel and going off of that. And that actually then changed the development of our game as a whole. And it was a pretty fun experience. And like, I know Travis's team did a lot of really cool stuff with that as well, as far as making their own loading screen for a Harvest Moon style game. And pretty much
Stardew Valley style, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much every team at least generated like themes for their game using ChatGPT, but the teams that really got into it really also got into making art for their games.
Yeah, it's really fun to add that like extra bit of splash screen. Even, if you're working on your own small games or small projects, it's nice to have some placeholder assets. Even if that's not where you're going to use long term, to be able to drop something, this looks like what I want. I can build around this now. And then I can focus on getting a good one later. Another one so I recently taught the computer vision track here at AI Camp. I just finished our 3 week section. One of the students I had, absolutely genius. They were trying to train their computer vision model to detect any potentially passive or active drowning people, but they realized that that's such a really niche data set. They almost wanted to be preemptive about it. So one of the things they added was their model was trained to detect children running around pools. That's, everyone's seen the signs like inscribed into the tile right next to the pool. Hey, don't run. Please don't run. Don't do it. We know you're going to, don't. So they decided, hey, we should try to train a model around this, try to preempt it. Turns out if you go to the internet, there's not that many images that people take of children running around pools. One of the important things about computer vision and really any AI in general is the data set. What are you training it on? How much do you have to reference off of? And they didn't have any. If there's 10 images of children running around pools and they're kind of bad quality, what am I supposed to do with it? So they actually went to Adobe Firefly and they started generating, hey, I want like 100 images of children running around pools. That way we can label them and add it to our data set. And as long as it looks like what you're expecting, you can label it and recognize it properly. The model should be able to do. So they got these images of children running near pools and labeled them all. And their model trained really, really well. Like I think they got to 92% accuracy or something across all of their classes just because they were able to supplement and reinforce a lot of the data. They got different variations. One of the cool things about generating stuff like this is you're naturally going to get all of these different variations that a computer vision model needs, with a lot of images, just a different angle, different lighting, different size, shape, distortion. There's so many like minor things that can drastically change what a computer tries to process an image. Think about, if I were to try and train a model to recognize words on a screen, think of how many fonts, think of italices, think of bold, underline. Just as soon as you start changing some of these parameters, the computer, it doesn't know where to start. So you either train it on everything or you train hyper specifically. So they were able to inflate their data set and get really good data with it. And then video creation. I'm sure everyone's seen, I'm sure hopefully some of you are working on the event we have that ends in July. There's some awesome, awesome applications for generating AI art to supplement with videos, create videos around it. I think one entry I've already seen to the video competition, they created an entire fake influencer. Like there's a whole lot of crazy application. I know if anyone is regularly in the general chat, you've probably seen Blake talk about his vinyl YouTube channel that he has created and now edits videos for. All of the assets he used are AI generated. I remember he messaged me one afternoon and he's like, "Hey, I just generated this header for my Twitter page. What do you think?" I'm like, "That's a genius idea." Like there's a lot of places we can use generated assets or really just assets in general that not everyone has access to. Not everyone's able and not everyone has the capability of being like super artistic. They're not. My brother is an amazingly talented artist. I'm not. I'm really bad at it. But it's nice to be able to start supplementing some of the social media portfolios. I used to play esports. My header before I replaced it was my old esports org that I played for, and I loved it just because I got some like assets I could throw up on like Twitter. There's a lot of really useful applications just for social media. So we have a guide of useful resources. There's a lot of awesome guides out there. Traveler's Guide to Latent Space is an insanely, insanely well documented piece. A little bit old now, but it is a great read and is still built on the same functionality that Stable Diffusion has. We have actual Stable Diffusion and Stable Diffusion XL related prompts, how to set up ChatGPT for prompts, how to get better Stable Diffusion prompts, and then comparisons with Midjourney. There's a lot of, well, I mentioned it earlier, how you set up prompts and how you go about it is really important. So one of the cool things we can do is set up ChatGPT to do it all for us. There's a lot of important verbiage you might want to stress and whatever. It's way easier if I can tell ChatGPT what I'm imagining and have ChatGPT work it out. And people have already worked out the exact, prompting to set up everything so that ChatGPT responds exactly how you want it, which is really, really convenient. So with that, I'm obviously to make it kind of interactive. I'm going to turn it over to you guys to experiment a little bit. And then I'm actually going to demonstrate a project from scratch using AI generated images, and we'll have some fun with it.